I am Dara Mitchell, 34 years old, sitting uncomfortably at the most expensive table in Lumiere, fidgeting with my simple button-down shirt. The irony is palpable. My sister Abigail glances at my modest watch, then whispers to our father loud enough for me to hear. What does she even do for money these days? Dad just shakes his head slightly. Little do they know the restaurant bill they are about to critique will never arrive. The maitre approaches our table with practiced grace. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know if your family has ever underestimated you, and hit subscribe to see how I finally stood up for myself after years of silent success. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy early on. My place was firmly at the bottom. While our family was comfortably middle class in suburban Connecticut, you would think we were royalty based on how seriously my parents took social status. My father, Andrew Mitchell, built his career at Greenwich Financial Partners, where he rose to become a senior banking executive over 30 years. His entire worldview revolved around appearances. The right schools, the right clothes, the right connections. When he came home each evening, he would meticulously hang his tailored suit, polish his Italian leather shoes, and place his Rolex watch in its special case. These objects weren't just possessions to him, they were symbols of his worth. Presentation determines reception. Dara, he would lecture me when I preferred comfortable clothes over the stiff dresses my mother selected. People judge your value in the first 7 seconds of meeting you. My mother Diane was the perfect complement to his status obsession. She dedicated her life to social climbing with the precision of a military strategist. The women in her garden club charity committees and country club circles feared and admired her. She monitored our achievements, not with motherly pride, but with calculation, measuring how each accomplishment could be leveraged to elevate the family standing. The Hendersons' daughter just made law review at Yale, she would casually mention at dinner. And what exactly are your plans after culinary school falls through? The question mark was merely decorative, as she never actually expected culinary school to be a genuine option. My sister Abigail was everything I was not. 5 years older, she inherited our parents' ruthless ambition, along with their conventional values. With her finance degree from Wharton and her executive position at a prestigious investment firm in New York, she represented the Mitchell legacy as it was meant to be. Her sleek bob haircut and designer wardrobe completed the picture of success my parents had envisioned for their children. My brother Benjamin, 3 years older than me, found his place in the family by excelling in both athletics and academics. Captain of his college lacrosse team, he parlayed his sports connections into a successful sports management agency. While he occasionally showed me glimpses of genuine affection in family settings, he inevitably joined the chorus of criticism directed my way. And then there was me. The disappointment, the creative one, the one who found more joy in the texture of freshly kneaded dough than in the stock market, reports that dominated our dinner conversations. The one who would sneak into our housekeeper Maria's kitchen on her days off to learn authentic Mexican recipes rather than attend the debutante lessons mother had arranged. Cooking is a wonderful hobby, Dara, my father would say, emphasizing the word hobby with barely concealed disdain. But it's not a career for someone with your background and education. The kitchen was my sanctuary, but to my family it represented my failure to embrace their values. While other parents proudly displayed art projects on refrigerators, mine removed my culinary school application from the mail and conveniently lost it before I could submit it. During my college years at Boston University, I compromised by majoring in business administration, while secretly taking culinary classes downtown. I worked part-time at a small Italian restaurant near campus, coming home with burns on my arms that I hid under long sleeves during family visits. Each semester I endured phone calls detailing Abigail's latest promotion or Benjamin's expanding client roster. When are you going to grow out of this food phase? Mother would ask, as if my passion were no different than my childhood obsession with horses or my brief attempt at learning violin. Holiday gatherings became showcases for criticizing my life choices. Thanksgiving dinners featured turkey that Mother insisted was catered from the finest service in Connecticut, but that I could tell came from the local grocery store deli counter. When I offered to cook the following year, the family unanimously rejected the idea, citing tradition. "We cannot have experimental cuisine at a Mitchell family gathering," father declared, as though my classical French training were equivalent to serving insects or inedible plants. The lowest point came at my college graduation dinner. While my parents had rented out entire restaurants to celebrate my siblings' graduations, mine was held in a private room of a chain steakhouse. When the time came for toasts, my father raised his glass to Dara's completion of her education and the hope that she finds direction soon. Not achievement, not success, not even congratulations. Just completion, like I had finished a mundane task rather than earned a degree with honors. That night, as my family dissected my job prospects with surgical precision, I made a decision that would change everything. I would not subject myself to these gatherings anymore. I would not continue to serve as the family's emotional punching bag. I would forge my own path, and I would do it far from their judgmental gazes. What I did not decide that night, but what evolved naturally over the years that followed, was that I would keep my eventual success completely hidden from them. If they could not support my struggle, they would not share in my triumph. 2 weeks after graduation, I packed everything I owned into my second-hand Toyota Corolla and drove 3,000 miles to Seattle. I had $12,000 in savings, a business degree. I had no intention of using conventionally, and a determination to prove everyone wrong, even if they would never know it. My first position was hardly glamorous. I secured a job as a dishwasher at Maison, one of Seattle's most exclusive French restaurants. The pay was minimum wage, but the education was priceless. I arrived early, stayed late, and absorbed everything like a sponge. "You work differently than the others," Chef Gabriel remarked one evening, as I meticulously cleaned copper pots after a 13-hour shift. Gabriel Rousseau had trained in Paris under Michelin-starred masters before bringing his talents to the Pacific Northwest. His praise was as rare as the white truffles he imported each fall. "I notice things," I replied simply. "What did you notice today?" he challenged. I hesitated before answering. The scallops came in looking slightly off. Too uniform. "I think your supplier switched to treated ones, and the new pastry assistant is overworking the dough for the tart shells." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. "Come in 2 hours early tomorrow. I want to show you something." Those 2 hours became my real culinary school. Gabriel taught me to butcher whole animals, to identify dozens of mushroom varieties blindfolded, to make the 5 mother sauces by feel and smell rather than recipe. Within 6 months I had moved from dishwasher to prep cook, though I still took dishwashing shifts to earn extra money. My apartment was a 300-square-foot studio above a noisy bar in a questionable neighborhood. I slept on a mattress on the floor and owned exactly 3 sets of clothes beyond my work uniforms. Every spare dollar went toward cooking equipment, reference books, and tasting experiences at competitors' restaurants. After 18 months at Maison, I was promoted to line cook. The day Gabriel moved me to the fish station, typically reserved for cooks. With 5 years of experience, I wanted desperately to call my parents. I imagined my father's surprised respect, my mother's reluctant pride. Instead, I called no one, celebrated with a single glass of wine at my tiny kitchen counter, and went to bed early to prepare for the next day's challenges. While working 60-hour weeks at Maison, I also took night classes in restaurant management at the local community college. My business degree provided a foundation, but I needed specific knowledge about food costing, inventory management, and hospitality regulations. 3 years into my Seattle journey, opportunity knocked in the form of disaster. A small neighborhood restaurant 2 blocks from my apartment went up for sale after the owner suffered a heart attack. The location was terrible, the decor dated, and the menu uninspired, but the bones were good. The kitchen equipment was commercial grade if outdated, and the rent was locked in for 5 more years at below market rates. I withdrew every penny of my savings, took out a high-interest loan, and convinced 2 of my fellow line cooks to join my venture, in exchange for future equity. We closed the deal on my 25th birthday, a fact I celebrated by painting the kitchen until 3 in the morning. The first 6 months of ownership nearly broke me. We completely revamped the menu, focusing on Pacific Northwest ingredients, prepared with classical European techniques. The food was good, great even, but the neighborhood wasn't ready for us. Critics dismissed us as pretentious, too expensive, too ambitious for the location. I worked 17-hour days serving as executive chef, bookkeeper, repair person, and occasionally bouncer when the bar next door's patrons wandered over. I lost 15 pounds. I couldn't afford to lose, and developed an eye twitch that would activate whenever vendors called about overdue payments. Then came the review that changed everything. Anton Phillips, the notoriously harsh critic for the Seattle Sentinel, visited anonymously and published a glowing review titled "Hidden Gem Shines, Despite Location." Overnight, our reservations doubled. Within a month, we had a 2-week waiting list. We survived the 2008 economic downturn by introducing a more affordable tasting menu that actually improved our food cost percentages. While restaurants across the city closed, we expanded our hours and hired staff from shuttered establishments. By our 3rd anniversary, we were not just stable, but thriving. When we had the opportunity to take over the lease of a failed restaurant in the trendy Capitol Hill neighborhood, I leveraged our success into favorable financing terms. The second location featured an open kitchen concept, higher price points, and a focus on tasting menus. We received our first James Beard nomination 18 months after opening. It was around this time that I received a rare phone call from my father. I was prepping for dinner service when his name appeared on my phone screen. "Dara," he began without greeting, "your mother and I were discussing your situation. Benjamin mentioned you're still working in restaurants out there." "Yes," I replied, pausing over the shallots I was mincing. "We think it's time you came home and got serious. Benjamin could use someone with a business degree in his company. Nothing prestigious, of course, but stable employment with growth potential." I looked around at my kitchen at the team, executing my vision with precision at the wall of positive reviews and the James Beard nomination letter. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully, "but I'm established here now." "Established as what?" "A glorified cook." "That business degree was expensive, Dara. When are you going to use it?" "I used it every day, of course. In negotiating with suppliers, managing cash flow, developing growth strategies, but explaining this would invite more questions, more judgment, more attempts to minimize my achievements." "I'm happy with my choices," I said instead. "Happiness doesn't build retirement accounts," he replied before ending the call. That conversation solidified my decision to keep my growing success private. If my own father could not conceive of my work as valuable or legitimate, what was the point of sharing my achievements? I continued to send obligatory birthday and holiday messages. I deflected questions about my specific work with vague references to the restaurant industry. I let them believe I was merely getting by rather than building an empire. In culinary circles, I became known by my professional name, D. Mitchell, deliberately gender-neutral to avoid the additional scrutiny women chefs often face. I declined opportunities to appear on cooking shows or participate in events that might be publicized in East Coast media. When the New York Times requested an interview after my 3rd James Beard nomination, I sent my business partner instead. 7 years after leaving Connecticut, I opened Lumiere, my flagship restaurant, in downtown Seattle. Occupying the entire 40th floor of a luxury high-rise, Lumiere offered 360-degree views of the city, Puget Sound, and on clear days, Mount Rainier. We received our first Michelin star within a year of opening, when the guide finally expanded to include Seattle. And this is where my family found themselves on that fateful evening, completely unaware that the restaurant where they had reluctantly agreed to meet their disappointing daughter was in fact entirely hers. The call from my mother came on a Tuesday afternoon as I was reviewing applications for a new pastry chef. "Dara, darling," she began with forced warmth. "Such wonderful news. The whole family will be in Seattle next weekend for a conference Benjamin is speaking at. We simply must have dinner together. It had been nearly 2 years since I had seen my family in person. Our last encounter had been at Thanksgiving, which I had attended only because my grandmother, the one relative who had always supported my culinary ambitions, had recently passed away. That dinner had featured the usual complement of passive-aggressive comments, outright criticism, and uncomfortable silence. "What brings everyone to Seattle?" I asked, buying time to process this unexpected development. "Benjamin is delivering the keynote at the Sports Management Association conference. Your father and I decided to make a trip of it, and Abigail and her fiancé are joining us. You remember she got engaged to Richard Huntington. His family owns half of Boston." The implicit comparison to my own single status hung in the air like cigarette smoke. "We have reservations Saturday evening at some place Benjamin's agent recommended. Supposedly very exclusive, probably overpriced for what it is. But that's Seattle for you." She laughed lightly. "I'm texting you the details now. Do try to dress appropriately, darling. First impressions, you know." The text arrived moments after we hung up. Lumiere, 8:30. My restaurant, my private table. The reservation had been made under my brother's name, which explained why my staff hadn't alerted me. I sat motionless at my desk, considering my options. I could call back and suggest a different restaurant, but that would raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer. I could manufacture an emergency and miss the dinner entirely. Or I could attend as planned and finally reveal the truth about my life. The last option terrified me most. After a decade of allowing my family to believe I was barely scraping by, the revelation of my success would require explanations. Why had I kept it secret? Was it shame? Spite? Pride? All of the above? There was a fourth option, I realized. I could attend as a normal guest, observe how my family behaved when they thought I was still struggling, and decide based on their treatment whether they deserved to know the truth. I called Catherine, my general manager. "Catherine, my family is coming to dinner Saturday. 8:30 Benjamin Mitchell's reservation." "Your family?" she repeated with surprise. In the 7 years we had worked together, Catherine had heard plenty about the Mitchell family dynamics, though she had never met them. "They don't know I own Lumiere," I explained. "I'd like to keep it that way, at least initially. Treat me like any other guest." "Any other guest who happens to be at the owner's table?" she clarified. "They won't know it's the owner's table. Just make sure the staff understands not to treat me differently. And if they're awful to you, you know how protective Marco is." Marco, my head waiter, had worked with me since my first restaurant. His loyalty was absolute. "Tell him to follow my lead. If I signal for the reveal, he'll know." I spent the next 3 days in a state of nervous anticipation. What should I wear? Something too casual would invite criticism, but my usual chef whites or business attire might signal my position. I settled on simple black trousers and a gray silk blouse, nice enough to avoid commentary, but not flashy enough to suggest financial success. Saturday arrived with unseasonable clarity, the late autumn sky, brilliant blue above Mount Rainier. I arrived at Lumiere an hour early, stopping briefly in my office to check reservations and the night's special preparations before heading to the bar. From this vantage point, I could observe my family's arrival without being immediately seen. They did not enter quietly. My father's voice carried across the hushed dining room as he complained about the wait for the elevator. My mother kissed the hostess as though greeting an old friend rather than a complete stranger. Abigail surveyed the room with the calculated assessment of someone determining if the venue met her standards, while her fiancé Richard checked his watch repeatedly, as if he had somewhere more important to be. Only Benjamin seemed genuinely interested in the restaurant itself, commenting on the architectural details and asking informed questions about the wine cellar visible through glass walls. I took a steadying breath and approached them. "Hi everyone," I said, trying to project casual confidence. The greetings I received in return ranged from my father's curt nod to my mother's performative cheek kiss that made no actual contact with my skin. Abigail looked me up and down with barely concealed disappointment, while Richard clearly struggled to remember who I was. Dara Benjamin said warmly, giving me a genuine hug. "Good to see you. You look well." "Thanks, Ben. You too." Marco approached with professional composure, though I could see the tension around his eyes. He had witnessed too many staff meetings where I had processed my family trauma to be entirely neutral. "The Mitchell party. Your table is ready. Please follow me." He led us through the main dining room, toward the semi-private alcove, where my table was always reserved. Located in the northeast corner, it offered spectacular views of both the Space Needle and the waterfront, while providing acoustic privacy for conversations. "This is quite a spot," Benjamin remarked as we were seated. "Great recommendation from Jim." "It's trying too hard," Abigail countered immediately. "All these restaurants with views charge double for mediocre food." I bit my tongue as Marco handed out menus. Every item on that menu had been personally developed and refined by me over months of testing. The current fall menu featured local ingredients at their peak, prepared with techniques I had studied and mastered over years. "My God, these prices," my father muttered loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. $74 for fish. Is it endangered? "The black cod is sustainably harvested from Alaskan waters," I found myself saying automatically. "It's prepared with a 3-day cure and served with foraged mushrooms." 5 pairs of eyes turned to me with varying degrees of surprise. "Well, look who became a food expert," Abigail smirked. "Did you study the menu online to impress us?" "I eat out occasionally," I replied evenly. "You clean up nicely when you try," my mother interjected, changing the subject with her usual lack of subtlety, though a statement necklace would really elevate that blouse. Before I could respond, the sommelier approached to discuss wine options. My father immediately took charge, ordering an overpriced Cabernet that would overwhelm most of the menu items. I caught the sommelier's eye and gave a slight shake of my head, our prearranged signal not to offer me the private wine list normally presented at my table. Benjamin's phone chimed and he glanced at it apologetically. "Sorry, I invited a couple of investors to join us for dessert. They're coming from another dinner." Great. More witnesses to my family dynamic. Just what this powder keg needed. As appetizers were served, the familiar family dynamics established themselves around the table. My father dominated the conversation with pronouncements about politics and business. My mother alternated between supporting his opinions and making observations about the other diners' attire and jewelry. Abigail and Richard formed a united front of condescension, while Benjamin attempted to include me in conversations that inevitably circled back to topics that excluded me. "Let's order another bottle," my father announced after draining his 3rd glass of the Cabernet. "Dara, are you sure you want wine? It's quite expensive." "I'm fine with what I have," I replied, still nursing my 1st glass. I needed a clear head to navigate this minefield. "Always conscious of the budget," Abigail commented with a thin smile. "Should you be sticking to the appetizer section, sis? Those entrees are pretty steep." "I can manage," I said quietly. "So what exactly are you doing these days, Dara?" my father asked, fixing me with the penetrating stare he typically reserved for underperforming employees. "Benjamin mentioned you're still in the restaurant business." The question was loaded with disapproval. The phrase "still in the restaurant business" suggesting a temporary situation that had inexplicably persisted. "Yes, I work in the restaurant industry," I answered carefully. "As what exactly?" "A server manager." He made both sound equally disappointing. "I'm involved in various aspects of the business." "That sounds very vague," my mother interjected. "Is it that you're between positions? There's no shame in that, though. At your age, stability should be a priority." "I'm quite stable," I assured her. "The service industry is so volatile, though," Abigail said, gesturing with her fork. "No benefits, no security. Richard's company is expanding their marketing department. Maybe he could put in a word." Richard, who had been checking his phone under the table, looked up with momentary confusion before nodding unconvincingly. Did I tell you about Benjamin's new contract? My father changed the subject, clearly having lost interest in my unimpressive career. $3 million for the agency representing that new quarterback from Stanford. What's his name, Ben? As Benjamin detailed his latest professional coup, I found myself mentally reviewing the kitchen's timing for our entrees. We were in the weeds with a large party of 12, and I itched to step in and help expedite. Instead, I sat and nodded and played my assigned role of underachieving daughter. The entrees arrived, each plate a perfect expression of my culinary philosophy. My father had ordered the dry-aged ribeye, a cut we aged in-house for 45 days, and served with bone marrow butter and triple-cooked potatoes. He cut into it, frowned, and immediately signaled for Marco. "This is medium well." I ordered medium rare. I could see from where I sat that the steak was a perfect medium, rare the center, warm, red, and juicy. "I apologize, sir," Marco said with practiced diplomacy. "I'd be happy to have the kitchen prepare a new steak for you." "No time for that. Just tell the chef to learn what medium rare actually means." Marco's eye twitched slightly, the only indication of his suppressed anger at hearing his beloved chef criticized. "I'll pass along your feedback." My mother picked delicately at her scallops, eating perhaps 2 bites before declaring herself absolutely stuffed. Abigail made a show of photographing her deconstructed duck cassoulet, before pushing it around her plate while continuing to drink steadily. "So Dara," she said, her words slightly slurred, "tell us about your apartment. Still in that same place?" "I've moved since you last visited," I answered truthfully. My current residence was the penthouse above the restaurant, a fact they would discover soon enough if the evening continued on its current trajectory. "Roommates. That's the only way to afford Seattle these days, I imagine," she pressed. "I live alone." "How resourceful," my mother said, with the same tone she might use to compliment someone on making a dress from curtains, though shared housing can be quite charming at your stage of life. Benjamin attempted to redirect the conversation. "The food here is fantastic. Have you eaten here before, Dara?" Before I could answer, Abigail laughed sharply. "As if she could afford this place on a regular basis. Can you even afford your portion tonight?" The question hung in the air, bald and ugly in its assumption. Several diners at nearby tables glanced over, some with embarrassment, others with the guilty interest of viewers witnessing a car crash. I noticed my staff exchanging looks. Drew, my sous chef, had emerged from the kitchen under the pretense of checking on diners, but was clearly monitoring the situation at my table. Catherine hovered near the bar, ready to intervene if given the signal. Without warning, 2 servers appeared with dishes. No one had ordered a small plate of seared foie gras with preserved cherries and a truffle risotto with gold leaf. My signature dishes sent out by a kitchen, showing solidarity with their chef. "We didn't order these," my father began to object. "Compliments of the chef," the server explained smoothly. "For the Mitchell party." My family looked surprised, but quickly recovered, diving into the free food with enthusiasm, while continuing to critique everything around them. "The lighting in here is all wrong," my mother declared. "Too moody. They're hiding something." "Probably the fact that the crowd is mostly tourists and tech nouveau riches," Abigail added. "No real Seattle history in a place like this." If only she knew that the reclaimed wood paneling came from a 19th-century lumber mill that had been my great-grandfather's first job when he immigrated to Washington. That the art on the walls was exclusively by Pacific Northwest artists, many of whom I had personally commissioned. That the restaurant's name, Lumiere, honored both the French techniques that formed the foundation of my cooking and the indigenous name for the region that translated roughly to place of light. But sharing these details would reveal too much. I continued to eat silently, weathering the storm of family judgment, while waiting for the inevitable breaking point. As the dinner progressed into its 3rd hour, I excused myself ostensibly to use the restroom, but actually to retreat to my office for a moment of peace. The evening had been exactly as difficult as I had anticipated, perhaps even worse, due to the alcohol loosening already loose tongues. Drew found me there, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. "Chef, with all due respect, why are you letting them treat you like this?" he asked, closing the door behind him. I sighed, turning to face my loyal sous chef of 5 years. Complicated family history. "They have no idea who you are, do they? What you've built?" "No," I admitted. "And I'm starting to think that was a mistake. Not the building part, the hiding it part." Drew leaned against my desk. "So tell them. Watch their faces when they realize they've been trash-talking the owner and executive chef all night." "It's not that simple." "It never is with family," he agreed. "But chef, I've worked with you through 3 restaurants and a Michelin star. I've seen you handle health inspectors, critics, and that celebrity who demanded we serve him off menu at midnight. You're the strongest person I know in the industry. Don't let them make you small." His words resonated with something that had been building in me all evening, perhaps for years. Why was I still playing the role they had assigned me? Why was I allowing their narrative to override the truth of my accomplishments? "You're right," I said finally. "It's time." "Want backup?" Drew offered. "Number. But have the kitchen prepare a special dessert course, the full chef selection, and tell Catherine to prepare the 96 sauternes." Drew grinned. "Going out with a bang, chef." "Something like that." When I returned to the table, the conversation had shifted to my apparent failings, discussed as though I were not about to rejoin them. She always had potential, my father was saying to Richard. But potential without direction is worse than mediocrity with purpose. She could have had a position at my firm years ago, Abigail added, but she was too proud to accept help. "Not proud," my mother corrected. "Stubborn. She gets that from your side, Andrew." Benjamin alone seemed uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "She seems happy, though. Isn't that what matters?" "Happiness doesn't build retirement accounts," my father repeated, his favorite dismissal of my life choices. I stood silently behind my chair, absorbing these final blows before making my presence known. As I settled back into my seat, I made a subtle hand gesture to Marco, who had been hovering nearby. He approached, immediately, professional smile firmly in place. "How is everyone enjoying their evening?" Before my father could launch into his critique of the perfectly cooked steak, Marco turned to me. "Welcome back, Miss Mitchell. I see your usual table is serving you well tonight. Chef wanted to know if the special menu met your expectations." The reaction around the table unfolded in slow motion. My father, who had been mid-sip of his wine, choked slightly, setting down his glass with excessive care. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. Abigail froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Richard looked confused, while Benjamin's expression shifted from surprise to dawning comprehension. "I'm sorry," my father said, finding his voice. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, Mr. Mitchell," Marco replied smoothly. "We're always honored when Miss Mitchell brings in special guests. As the owner would say, family is everything." The silence that descended on the table was absolute, broken only by the ambient restaurant noise that suddenly seemed very distant. "Owner," my mother repeated faintly. I took a deep breath, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "Yes, I own Lumiere. I'm also the executive chef. This is my restaurant." "That's impossible," Abigail said immediately. "You're making this up for attention." "Why would the waiter lie about who owns the restaurant?" Benjamin asked reasonably. "He's probably her boyfriend or something," Abigail dismissed. "This is just sad, Dara." As if on cue, the kitchen doors swung open, and Chef Gabriel, my mentor from Maison, who now consulted for my restaurant group, emerged in his whites. He made a beeline for our table. "Dara, the new dessert presentation is ready for your approval before we serve it to your guests," he said completely naturally, as he had done hundreds of times before. "Thank you, Gabriel," I replied. "Everyone, this is Chef Gabriel Rousseau, formerly of Maison. He taught me most of what I know about French technique." Gabriel, who knew nothing about the evening's deception, nevertheless picked up on the tension immediately. "Your daughter is the most talented chef I've ever mentored," he told my stunned father. "Seattle is lucky to have her, though. Paris keeps trying to steal her away." My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "There's clearly been some kind of mistake. Dara works in restaurants, yes, but she's not. She couldn't possibly own this place," I finished for him. "Why not?" "Because you never mentioned it," my mother exclaimed. "Why would you keep something like this secret?" The real question hung unspoken. Why would you let us believe you were struggling when you were succeeding beyond our expectations? I looked around the table at my family's confused, disbelieving faces. "Would you like a tour of the kitchen before dessert? It might help clear things up." The walk to the kitchen was silent, my family following me like stunned ducklings. As we passed through the dining room, regular customers nodded respectfully in my direction. Staff members straightened their posture and greeted me with a mixture of Chef and Miss Mitchell. The kitchen was in full dinner service mode, a choreographed chaos that I normally found soothing. Tonight, with my family witnessing this part of my life, for the first time I saw it through new eyes, appreciating the precision and dedication of my team. "This is the main line," I explained, shifting automatically into tour guide mode. "We serve an average of 250 covers nightly, with a focus on sustainable Northwest ingredients prepared using classic French techniques with modern innovations." The staff called out chef as we passed, many of them shooting curious glances at the group trailing behind me. Word had clearly spread about the identity of my dinner guests. "So, you're telling me you run this entire operation?" my father asked, skepticism still evident in his tone. "Yes, along with 2 other restaurants in Seattle and 1 in Portland." "But how? With what money?" he pressed. "I started small with a failing neighborhood restaurant. Built it up, reinvested the profits, expanded strategically." "She's being modest," Drew interjected, appearing beside us with a plate of perfectly executed quenelles. Chef Mitchell transformed that first location from a greasy spoon into a destination restaurant in under a year. The waiting list was 2 months long. My father's expression shifted slightly, a familiar calculation occurring behind his eyes. "Well, this certainly puts things in a different light. You should have told us, Dara. We would have helped with investments, connections." And there it was. The immediate attempt to retroactively insert himself into my success story, to claim some credit for achievements he had played no role in, had actively discouraged, in fact. "I had the funding and connections I needed," I replied evenly. "We should talk about expansion opportunities," Abigail chimed in, suddenly interested now that there was clearly money involved. "Richard's family has holdings in several major markets that would be perfect for your concept." My mother had been uncharacteristically quiet, but now she approached a line cook who was plating a delicate arrangement of seasonal vegetables. "Do you all know who Dara's father is? He's quite prominent in banking circles in Connecticut." The cook glanced at me in confusion before returning to his station. "Mom, please don't distract my staff during service," I said quietly. "I'm just making conversation," she replied defensively. "I don't see why you're being so sensitive about this. If anything, we should be the ones upset. You've deliberately misled us for years." I led them out of the main kitchen and into my private office adjacent to the dining room. Awards and framed reviews lined the walls, including the Michelin star announcement and 3 James Beard nominations. A large photograph showed me with the governor at a charity event last year. My mother immediately gravitated toward the awards wall, eyes widening as she took in the scope of my accomplishments. My father studied the financial magazines that had featured profiles of my business acumen. "I suspected something," Benjamin said, quietly hanging back as the others explored the office. "I follow the food scene pretty closely. About 2 years ago, I read an article about the reclusive chef D. Mitchell and wondered if it might be you, but when I tried to find photos, there were hardly any." "I'm camera shy," I explained, "and I deliberately kept a low profile." "Because of us," he concluded, not a question, but a statement of understanding. "Partly," I admitted. My father overheard this exchange and turned from the display of press clippings he had been examining. This is absurd. You kept your success secret to what punish us, make us look foolish. No, I replied, feeling suddenly exhausted. I kept it secret because nothing I ever did was good enough for you. Every achievement was dismissed, every passion ridiculed. At some point, it became easier to stop sharing my life than to continue facing your disapproval. We never disapproved of success, he countered. We disapproved of wasting your potential on what we thought was a dead-end career. And that's exactly the problem, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to remain calm. You decided what my potential should be, without ever asking what I wanted. You defined success so narrowly that anything outside your vision was automatically failure. We wanted what was best for you, my mother interjected. You wanted what was best for your image of the family. There's a difference. Abigail, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. So all those times you couldn't come to my engagement party, or Mom's birthday, or the family vacation because you were working, or couldn't afford the flight. I was working, I confirmed. Running multiple restaurants is more than a full-time job. But yes, I could have afforded the flights. I chose not to attend because those gatherings inevitably became opportunities to criticize my life choices. You deceived us, my father said, his tone hardening. Made us look like fools tonight. How exactly did I make you look foolish? I asked, genuinely curious. By allowing you to be yourselves, I never lied about my work. I said I was in the restaurant industry. I am. You assumed that meant I was struggling, because that fit your narrative about my choices. You deliberately withheld information, he insisted. Yes, I acknowledged. After years of having my accomplishments dismissed, I stopped sharing them. That's on me. But the reason I felt I needed to withhold that information, that's on you. The tension in the room was palpable. My father looked as though he wanted to continue arguing, but was constrained by the growing realization that he was standing in his daughter's domain, surrounded by evidence of her undeniable success. Benjamin broke the stalemate. I think what Dad is trying to say is that we're proud of what you've built here, Dara. It's impressive by any standard. Right, Dad? My father nodded stiffly, clearly struggling with a complex mix of emotions. Pride warred with embarrassment recognition, with resentment at being kept in the dark. Your dessert course should be ready, I said, checking my watch. We should return to the table. As we filed out of the office, my mother lingered behind to whisper urgently, You should have told us, Dara. We would have been so proud to tell our friends. There it was again, the concern for appearances, rather than for my actual well-being or happiness. Some things never changed. Back at the table, an elaborate dessert presentation awaited us, the full chef's tasting selection that was normally reserved for VIPs and food critics. Delicate pastries house-made ice creams, chocolate constructions, and fruit preparations filled the table, accompanied by the vintage sauternes I had requested. Now that we know who you really are, Abigail said, as we settled back into our seats, you should come to my wedding. Richard's family is flying in guests from across Europe. Your restaurants would make a great conversation piece. I studied my sister, trying to determine if she was being deliberately obtuse or if she genuinely could not see how offensive her suggestion was. I'm not a conversation piece, Abigail. I'm your sister, and my work isn't something you can use to impress your future in-laws. That's not what I meant, she backpedaled unconvincingly. I think what we all need, Benjamin interjected diplomatically, is time to process tonight's revelations. Dara has built something extraordinary here, and we're all adjusting to this new understanding of her life. I smiled gratefully at my brother, the one family member who seemed capable of recognizing the emotional complexity of the situation. You're right, I agreed. This has been an overwhelming evening for everyone. Why don't we enjoy these desserts, and we can talk more tomorrow when everyone has had time to reflect. My father raised his glass in what appeared to be a peace offering. To unexpected discoveries, he said, his tone suggesting he was making a significant concession by acknowledging my success at all. I raised my own glass, not in surrender, but in recognition that this was perhaps the most he was capable of in the moment. To new beginnings, I replied. 6 months after that revelatory dinner, I stood in the private dining room of my newest restaurant, surveying the table settings for a special event. The spring sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the space with golden light that reflected off crystal and silver. So much had changed in those 6 months, both professionally and personally. The confrontation with my family had forced a reckoning that was painful but ultimately necessary. Like lancing a wound, the initial hurt gave way to a cleaner, healthier relationship, though the scar tissue would always remain. My relationship with Benjamin had deepened considerably. Free from the constraint of my secret, we spoke weekly about our respective businesses, sharing insights and occasionally collaborating. He had referred several high-profile clients to my catering division, and I had introduced him to restaurateurs looking for investment opportunities in sports venues. My mother had made the most surprising overture, asking if I would teach her to cook during her next visit to Seattle. Our first lesson had been awkward, her perfectionism clashing with my experiential teaching style, but by the third session we had found a rhythm. While we would never be close in the way some mothers and daughters were, we had established a fragile connection based on mutual respect rather than obligation. My father's adjustment had been the most difficult. His initial attempt to claim retroactive credit for my success gave way to grudging respect and eventually to a strained pride that seemed genuine if limited. He still occasionally made comments about how my business degree had clearly been put to good use, after all unable to fully embrace that my culinary skill was equally valuable to my financial acumen. Abigail remained. Abigail, though the power dynamic between us had shifted irreversibly. Her wedding had proceeded without my participation as a bridesmaid, though I did attend as a guest. She had continued to post photos from Lumiere on her social media accounts, tagging me in ways that suggested we had always been supportly close, a revisionist history I chose not to correct publicly. More significant than these external changes, however, was my internal transformation. The burden of secrecy I had carried for a decade had been heavier than I realized. With that weight lifted, I found myself more willing to step into the public role I had long avoided. I had given interviews to several national publications, accepted speaking engagements at culinary schools, and even made a brief appearance on a cooking competition show as a guest judge. I had also found love unexpectedly with Emma, a food photographer who had come to shoot my spring menu and stayed for dinner. Our relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and a shared passion for creating beauty through food. She understood my work commitments in a way no previous partner had, and her warm, straightforward nature provided a counterbalance to my more reserved personality. Most importantly, I had finally learned to take pride in my achievements without seeking external validation. The approval I had so desperately wanted from my family as a young adult now seemed far less important than my own satisfaction with the life I had built. The door to the private dining room opened, interrupting my reflections. Catherine entered with a clipboard and her usual efficient energy. "The first guests will arrive in 20 minutes, she informed me. "Your brother just texted that he's parking now." Tonight's event was a fundraiser for a culinary scholarship program I had established for disadvantaged youth interested in restaurant careers. Benjamin had helped secure several athletes as attendees, while my father had surprised me by making a substantial donation. My mother had assisted with the guest list, leveraging her social networking skills in service of a cause she now deemed worthy. As I made final adjustments to the table settings, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The hurt child seeking approval had become a confident woman who no longer needed permission to claim her success. The secret keeper had become an open book, stronger for having revealed her truth. The greatest lesson I had learned was that authentic success required authentic living. Hiding my achievements had protected me from criticism, but had also prevented me from fully embodying my accomplishments. True confidence came not from external validation, but from internal alignment, from living honestly according to my own values, rather than someone else's expectations. As the first guests began to arrive, I stepped back into the role of host and chef, greeting benefactors and scholarship recipients with equal warmth. Benjamin arrived with several of his clients embracing me with genuine affection, before introducing me as my sister, the culinary genius behind this incredible space. Later, as the evening wound down and the last guests departed, I found myself alone in the kitchen, preparing a simple late-night snack for the staff, who had worked tirelessly to make the event a success. This perhaps was my favorite moment in any day, cooking not for acclaim or customers but for the people who shared my vision and helped bring it to life. Emma appeared in the doorway, camera in hand. "Got some beautiful shots tonight," she said, coming to stand beside me at the counter. "Your family actually looked proud in a few of them." I smiled, slicing fresh bread for the staff meal. "Progress," I agreed. "You know what I noticed tonight?" She continued, stealing a slice of the artisan cheese I was arranging. "You introduced yourself as Chef Mitchell to everyone. No hesitation, no qualification. Just owning your title." I hadn't realized the significance of that small change until she pointed it out. For years I had downplayed my achievements, prefacing introductions with modifiers that diminished my role. Tonight I had simply been who I was without apology or explanation. "Growth," I acknowledged. As we served the late-night meal to my tired but satisfied team, I felt a contentment that went beyond professional success or family reconciliation. I had found my place in the world, not by conforming to others' expectations, but by creating my own path. The approval I had once so desperately sought now seemed far less important than the community I had built and the values I expressed through my work. Have you ever hidden your talents or success from family members who you felt wouldn't understand or appreciate them? Drop a comment below to share your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel for more authentic life stories, and share this video with someone who might need encouragement to embrace their true path. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, the most important validation is the one you give yourself.